Hello and welcome to another edition of the Hitting the Hardwood podcast, your home for all the latest Minnesota Lynx and WNBA news, analysis, and coverage. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I'm your host, Mitchell Hansen, and I'm really excited to be joined by Kevin Pelton, who covers both the NBA and the WNBA for ESPN, and is co-host of the Fabulous Peltoncast. Kevin, welcome. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we dive into things, I kind of want to just open things up and let people know where they can follow you, where they can find your work. I know it's not hard to find you on social media and all the great work that you do. So if you want to maybe just plug in kind of the different areas that they can find you.
Well, I suppose it's a little confusing on social media that I have a women's basketball account and a men's basketball account. So K Pelton WBB is where my WNBA, and when I dip my toe into women's college basketball, usually during the NCAA tournament, that can be found. But then the work itself, ESPN.com's WNBA homepage should have pretty much all of it.
Well, great. That I know I speak for a lot of people that I really enjoy. Both I'm an NBA and a WNBA fan, but specifically the WNBA side. I appreciate your coverage as well as the NBA side. It's a lot of great stuff, and yourself and the rest of the team at ESPN do a great job in spotlighting and covering the league. So both leagues. So thank you for all you do and all the work that you do to cover this game.
Well, it's really fun. It's a passion for me. This is, depending on whether you count the bubble seasons, it's obviously I wasn't going to games then, but this is 22 seasons for me in the WNBA. And this will be my first that does not involve Sue Bird in any form or fashion, since my first WNBA game I covered was her first game.
It's going to be weird seeing, well, obviously not seeing Sue Bird, but even, not seeing eventually Diana Taurasi, not seeing maybe even, let's say somewhere a few years down the road, not seeing Candace Parker or, those kind of players. It's weird to see that, and we see that in every sport, and every NBA just went through that a while ago with the late Kobe Bryant, obviously like Tim Duncan and a lot of those guys. So it's weird seeing the new wave come in, but then you get those new stars that kind of take over the league. But like you said, it will be weird. It's kind of like the Lynx fans seeing that's the dynasty starting five of Lindsey Williams, Mona Augustus, Maya Moore, Sylvia Fowles, Rebecca Brunson, all of them kind of departing. It's weird, but it's exciting at the same time.
Yeah, it's an end of a chapter, I think. And in Minnesota's case, having Maya's official announcement of her retirement on top of Sylvia Fowles' last game, kind of did the same thing as in Seattle we're dealing with Sue Bird's retirement and then Breanna Stewart's departure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting. It's fun to kind of, I don't know, change things up a little bit and see new faces come in, new talent come in, and there's plenty of that. There's, as we see in the college game right now, there will be more, but it's cool to kind of see the changing of hands over time. But well, let's dive right into some questions or kind of some conversation when it comes to the upcoming year. Well, I guess kind of backtracking a little bit. What are your thoughts on the busy off season that we did have and kind of everything that took place over the course of the off season, especially with a team that you mentioned, Seattle, who you kind of cover a little bit closer than or you have covered closer than a lot of people. But what do you think of overall the league and even maybe even Seattle, of course?
Well, I've done some research, I've done some analysis. I think Las Vegas and New York might be the favorites in the league this year. I think it was the culmination of what we've seen in this new collective bargaining agreement and the way that it's opened up free agency. And that's something that, Sue has talked about a lot from her perspective of being in the league from, before free agency actually existed when she was drafted, to a point where suddenly it has become such a large part of the league, and it's giving players a chance to kind of choose where they want to play, what kind of team they want to be a part of. And I think that's a really awesome thing for the league long term. In the short term, it does seem to have created this kind of structure where we have two teams that are perceived, and I think probably rightly so, to be apart from the rest of the league. Now that does create some interesting opportunities for everyone else to play for, those other spots in the semifinals and things like that, where I think that's going to be a relatively open race this season. But the other aspect of it is, of course, as good as the Liberty and Aces rosters look on paper, they do have to do it on the court, and that's a little bit different challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be interesting. It's weird that I mean, in every sport has this, even the WNBA or especially the WNBA. But it seems like we've always in years past had those top few teams, but this year maybe more so than maybe the last couple of years. It seems like we're very top heavy, and then everybody maybe like 4 through, or you can maybe say like 4 or 5 through 10 is just like nobody knows what's going to happen because those teams seem so even. But yeah, I think the obvious clear favorites right now would obviously be Las Vegas and New York, but it's kind of a crazy time. The off seasons the last few years have been very interesting in the WNBA, which I think is great for the game and it brings attention to the game. But yeah, this off season more so than ever, it's kind of crazy to see the kind of the shift of the landscape of the WNBA.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, it's not like we've not seen top-heavy WNBA, seasons before. The Minnesota LA finals, that period of time, it seemed like those two teams had elevated above everyone else. You go back to the early days of the league, Houston's dynasty into LA's dynasty, and kind of the overlap there where those two teams were way ahead of everyone else. So what makes this different is the fact that it is something that has really been driven by free agency, even though, the Aces, arguably their two best players, Asia Wilson and Kelsey Plummer, both players they drafted and developed there. Still the Chelsea Gray was the piece that put them over the top, I think, last season to win the championship, in addition to the arrival of Becky Hammon. And in New York, it's a roster where it's going to be really heavily built by newcomers joining, Sabrina Ionescu and Betnijah Laney and the other pieces that they had there in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it comes to kind of the that kind of leads into my next question with the layout of the league. What do you think would be the kind of overall layout? Is it basically like we just kind of talked about, the top 2-3 teams and then it's kind of everybody else? What do you think?
So to me, I think there's a second tier, and that second tier is Connecticut and Washington. I think most people put Washington in that group because of, the fact that they were fifth last year, were a win away from having home court advantage in that series against the Storm and potentially advancing to the semifinals. And, the development of Shakira Austin, a healthy offseason for Elena Deladon, the addition of Brittany Sykes, all of that. I think people are excited about them. To me, Connecticut is there as well. And this is, even with the departure of Jonquel Jones, this is a team that we've seen play a season without Jonquel before. They struggled early on in that wobble season, but eventually put it together and reached the semifinals and gave Vegas a pretty good run in that series that went the distance. In the semifinals, they were one win away from the WNBA finals without Jonquel Jones ever stepping foot on the court. And it was not the exact same group. Obviously, Breon January and Jasmine Thomas in the backcourt are not part of this mix anymore. But, the Alyssa Thomas, Brianna Jones front court, DeWanna Bonner, I think still has the chance to be as good as any outside of New York and Las Vegas. And, I think they'll get good enough guard play. Natisha Heidemann started at point guard last year as they made the finals with Thomas's injury early in the season. You put all of that together, I think that's a team that can be in the mix for, home court advantage, and strongly in the mix for home court advantage in the first round and a playoff series win, along with Washington and then Vegas and New York. Then after that, I think is where it probably gets wide open. I ran yesterday the first incarnation of my WNBA projections for this season, and you've got, let me see here, 5 teams separated by 2.5 wins on average out of the 40 we're going to play this season. So that group, I think, could go pretty much any direction, and it's similar to what my colleague M.A. Vopel's power rankings looked like on ESPN.com in terms of that group is Dallas, Atlanta, Minnesota, Phoenix, LA. A lot of teams with a lot of question marks, a lot of new pieces, a lot of different looks. And, someone from that group is probably going to break out and threaten that top 4, but who it is going to be tough to say before the season.
Mm-hmm. Do you think when it comes to kind of you mentioned the different tiers, do you think, that top tier, the championship, tier would be, those top 2 teams of Las Vegas, New York, and then you said the, second tier would kind of be Washington, Connecticut. What, do you think beyond that, the kind of the middle of the pack and then the bottom 4 teams, what do you think that might look like? I guess we could maybe even just say, like, who do you think might be at the bottom again this year?
Yeah, I mean, so similar again to the power rankings, the team that come out at the bottom of the projections, Indiana, unsurprisingly, even with the addition of Leah Boston, I think they're going to be a lot more competitive and they're on the right track, but still a ways to go when you look at, kind of the gap between them and the rest of the league in the past. Then Seattle, which is going to be interesting to watch with there is some continuity, obviously, with Jewel Lloyd as a star. And I think, there's a case that they could play somewhat similarly to they did in 2019 without Subert and Breanna Stewart when they made the playoffs, beat Minnesota in that one game first round before getting blown out by LA in the second round. The difference is, even with those pieces in place, Jordan Canada at point guard gave them a defensive presence that right now that position is a much bigger question mark with Yvonne Turner, who, hasn't played a lot in the WNBA in recent seasons, looking like the favorite to start there. Jade Melbourne in the mix as a 20-year-old rookie. And then Ivana Dojkic, who we haven't seen yet. She just showed up in training camp a few days ago. We'll see whether she makes the roster. But, that position is probably not going to be as solid for them as it was in 2019. I mean, Chicago, I'm somewhat hesitant to write off because of the fact that, they do have a considerable amount of talent. They do have James Wade, who has done a terrific job since getting to Chicago. But projection wise, they are more kind of in this bottom tier than in that middle tier.
Mm-hmm. A side note on James Wade, one of my favorite coaches. He's one of the nicest people in the world. I kind of got introduced to him for, I don't know, one of the first times when he was with the Lynx, when he was an assistant with the Lynx before he did end up leaving. And it just one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. So that's just kind of a side note, but he's great. He's done, like you said, he's done a really solid job in Chicago. And I think he'll be there for a little while. So hopefully that is the case. But when it comes to, and obviously by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be, on the cusp of the start of the year. The year hasn't started. But what if you could make one bold prediction for the year ahead, whether it's individual wise, team wise, whatever it may be, what would you say that prediction would be?
I suppose I'm going to stay close to home, and I think that Ezi Megbagor is going to be the breakout player of this season, most improved player. I think she's got an excellent chance of leading the league in blocks, depending on how much Brittany Griner plays in Phoenix. And, it's kind of unfortunate that the Tina Charles addition and moving her into the starting lineup last season, as he lost some of the momentum she had in the first half when she was starting alongside Breanna Stewart in the front court and was, I think, at that point leading the league in blocks. But, she's had a great season. This was her first time playing in Europe. She played in Hungary this offseason. And, I think that confidence is going to help her as a scorer. And look, the Storm are going to need it. After Jewel Lloyd, there's a lot of question marks in terms of who's going to create offense. So I think there's the opportunity for her to have, not probably the exact same season that Natasha Howard had in 2019, playing that similar role, because Howard was all WNBA first team defensive player of the year. That's a pretty high bar, but I think something in line with that in terms of a first all-star appearance, etc.
Mm-hmm. I'm very high on her this year too. I think she's just gonna not only have kind of an expanded role with the shift of personnel on the roster, but I just really like her game. I agree that I think she's gonna have a really solid year this year, and I hope that is the case, because Seattle needs to kind of shift focus on who they're going to build around, what the future of the franchise is going to look like. So I think that's an important thing. I'm going to pitch in on my bold prediction. I think that Washington is either going to upset one of those top two teams, New York or Las Vegas. Washington to me is, I don't want to say they're a dark horse because they're right there. Like everybody knows they're talented, but I don't think they don't put them in and I guess I wouldn't do this either, but they don't put them in that same tier as a New York and Las Vegas. But I think in the playoffs, depending on if we have a healthy Elena Delle Donne, I do think that, Washington could put up a good series with one of those two teams, maybe bring it to, 5 games and pull off a quote unquote upset. But to me, that's kind of my prediction, is that Washington is going to be there right at the end. And I think that they're going to put together a solid season.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was a team that I believe led the league in defensive rating last year, and then added Brittany Sykes, who's
Mhm.
arguably the league's best perimeter defender. So, with the development of Shakira Austin, I think that their ceiling is really high at that end of the court. And if you've got a healthy Elena Deladon, you're going to have a pretty solid offense, even if you would like a little bit more shooting around her on the perimeter.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Let's talk a little Lynx basketball since we do a decent amount on this podcast. What do you think of the team that's currently constructed right now, and kind of what has taken place and what maybe didn't take place this offseason? With a lot of people had high hopes and maybe high expectations for the Lynx. I know obviously they courted, or they had conversations with Brianna Stewart, Courtney Vandersloot, Azura Stevens. They tried, but they swung big and they struck out. But what do you think of what's taken place in kind of the team that's constructed right now?
Yeah, to me, that was a sign of respect for the Minnesota organization generally, and Cheryl Reeves specifically, that they got in the mix with those players because, Seattle had the obvious like hometown for Vandersloot, where Stewie's been playing ties. New York had the element of New York, just broadly being New York. And for Minnesota to be in the mix there, I think, was primarily because of what that organization has built. So, a tribute to them. What didn't happen, obviously, was signing a starting point guard, and that's going to be the question mark about the Lynx, as it has been dating back to 2020. And the thing I think that is interesting to me is, with Sylvia Fowles' absence, we've seen, just like I said about Connecticut without Jonquel Jones, we've seen a Minnesota team without Sylvia basically being a factor in the wobble end up, is one of the top 4 teams in the league during the regular season. So, to what extent they can recapture that style of play, going kind of 5 out, it's a different mix, but you've still got Damaris Stuntis potentially in the mix as kind of that floor spacing center that you lose a little something defensively compared to what you had with Sylvia Fowles. Given Sylvia Fowles is maybe the most dominant defensive player in the history of this league, but offensively it creates a lot of space for Nafisa Collier to operate, and she's someone else I think that is going to have a big year coming off of that handful of games she played after giving birth last year. I'm very excited about the potential for her, but the other factor in that was, Crystal Dangerfield coming in and solidifying that point guard spot as the rookie of the year that year. Who's that player going to be on this year's roster? Tough to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that back to your point about the kind of the style of play, or even the style of this team in general on both sides of the floor. I agree that they're obviously going to take a step back defensively. You don't have a Sylvia Fowles in the paint. That is a huge factor, and that will play a huge factor. Offensively, I'm really intrigued with this team because, as Cheryl Reeve has talked about, Nafisa Collier has talked about a lot. They're really trying to push the pace this year. They're really trying to play that aggressive up-tempo style of offense. And Fee said that, that's something that she hasn't personally played in the WNBA yet, because they've had the likes of Sylvia Fowles where they've been going inside out rather than, being, running in transition and in kind of playing that aggressive 5-out style of play. And I'm really intrigued with what could happen with her. Not only the fact that she's back to what she called quote unquote 2021 Fee, but just back to being healthy and kind of back into full game shape, like she was in 2021. But just a mix of that and the different style of play it's not going to be a Cheryl Reeves style offense that we've seen in the past, or really since she's gotten to Minnesota. But I think it'll suit this offense and this team really well. And Diamond Miller thrown into that mix too, I think is helpful and will be a nice addition. One thing that they did talk about this week too is during training camp is the potential of Diamond Miller and Fisa Collier together. I mean, Fee she's going to be in her 5th year. I mean, she's still really young. Diamond Miller is obviously really young coming in as a rookie, and I think that depending on how Diamond develops, I think that could be a really solid duo moving forward, and just kind of having those two-headed monster on the wing and kind of being able to run in transition. I think that'll be a nice thing to have in Minnesota. And you can tell Cheryl just kind of she smiles from ear to ear just thinking about the potential of those two players. So that I think it'll be a really interesting year in that regard, just to see how they run their offense and run the team in general. But
yeah, I mean, I think the flip side of being as successful as you have as Minnesota has for a long period of time is you don't end up with a lot of high draft picks.
right.
And even Fee wasn't an especially high draft pick coming off a year where they made the playoffs, but they were able to strike gold in the middle of the first round there. And now you've got this lottery pick that they have not had in a long period of time, and a high lottery pick in Miller. And yeah, I think those are the start of your foundation going forward. And now it's just kind of finding that perimeter, that ball handling counterweight to them, which depending on how their season goes and how the draft goes, there's going to be a few of those coming into the league in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is this year is a good year to have a development year like Minnesota's trying to have, and nobody's gonna admit that they're tanking, because I don't think they're deliberately tanking. It's just kind of maybe the reality of where they're at. They might struggle this year. And they're not gonna sit their stars to tank like we see in other sports or whatever. But that's just not the nature of Cheryl Reeve, and that's not the nature of that organization. But if that does happen, I don't think they're going to be upset. Let's just say that, because they are going to have a potential of landing one of those stars if they do come out of the college game this year. And yeah, if that happens, I don't know, it'll be a good problem to have at that time. But yeah, they do need that ball handler. And ever since Lindsay Whalen retired, that's something that Cheryl has talked about needing and wanting. And she wants that Lindsay Whalen style of player, and there's just not that available. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they attack that. But I think they're finally starting to turn the page of post Sylvia follows. Okay, let's what are we going to make this? What do we want this team to look like? Not, rather than what do we have and how do we build around that? They're trying to shape something now, which is good.
Yeah, and to your stylistic point, the one difference from 2020 in the bubble is, like, there you went into the season expecting to play a certain way, and then Sylvia suffers an injury, and you kind of have to adjust on the fly. And there was a period of time where teams were basically playing every other day that entire regular season. Like, you got one, couple day break at some point in there. There wasn't a lot of practice time to really change your philosophy midstream. So it was kind of remarkable the Lynx were as successful doing it as they were. This year, they kind of know going in that they're going to be this style of team.
Mm-hmm. I kind of view that year a little bit, the bubble year, and this year somewhat similar in the regard that it's going to be a learning process for Minnesota, basically on the fly. Like you said, they all of a sudden unexpectedly didn't have Sylvia Fowles. Well, this year they don't have Sylvia Fowles. They know that, but they don't really know what they have. And that being able to play free and just kind of let them go, I think might resemble a little bit of that bubble year, where they weren't overthinking things. They weren't trying to do straight X's and O's like they typically would, but they just went out there and played. And I think that's something that we might see this year, and especially with the younger team and the newer pieces together. We say this all the time, like those kinds of teams, I don't want to make this sound like it's mean, but they don't know better. They just go out there and they just play. And that's where a lot of times you find success that way, because teams don't know how to scheme against you. So I think that'll be a interesting aspect as well. But what, when it comes to expectations for the Lynx, what do you think would be realistic expectations for this team? Do you think it'd be around what they finished last year, maybe lower, higher? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think a playoff berth is, a spot in the playoffs is a great outcome for the Lynx. Like, it's an improvement on what they did last year, despite the loss of Sylvia Fowles. Obviously, you expect a little bit more with them with Collier's return. I think anywhere 5th through 8th is a good outcome. And if you somehow manage to get home court advantage or win a series in the first round, then, that's a home run of a season in my book.
What do you think would be considered and you kind of just touched on it a little bit there, but what would you think would be a success and maybe a failure for this team this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they miss the playoffs, it's a bit of a disappointment. Although, as we just talked about, the right year or years if you look at the next two drafts, since we don't know for sure, whether players are going to use their COVID years. It's the right time to do it. And frankly, if a team like Minnesota with their organizational pedigree ends up with the number one pick or, a top two or three pick, that could change some players' decisions, I think, in terms of, I'm more eager to come out if I know that I'm going to a good situation like that than a kind of more unsettled situation in the league. So, but I still think that would be a disappointment. It would kind of indicate that, either that need at point guard is too much to overcome, or that the young talent isn't quite as far along as you hoped.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned that about the whether or not players would come out if, let's say, if Minnesota's there. That immediately I think of Paige Bueckers, because let's say Minnesota is right there or whatever at the top of the draft, and Paige is deciding whether or not she wants to come out of college and join the WNBA. I think she would if Minnesota was sitting there, just because it's the hometown team. She's familiar with people on the roster. Obviously, Nafisa Collier has a UConn tie. Dorky Juhas and Paige Bueckers are really close. I know Cheryl Reeve and Paige have somewhat of a relationship, so it would be interesting. That's something that I think a lot of Lynx fans and the Lynx in general would welcome, and they'd be okay with that situation and seeing if she would come out. But I think that's one situation where it would maybe it would sway it a little bit more. You could even say Caitlin Clark. I mean, Caitlin Clark has a close tie to Minnesota, with just being in Iowa, but she even came to Timberwolves game during the playoffs, so she might be a Minnesota fan. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what happens. I do agree with you, though, that I think a success would obviously just be reaching the playoffs. I mean, finishing better than last year is a success, I think, with this team. Failure would be, missing the playoffs or being lower than what they were last year. But at the same time, that might be a win. So it's kind of
it's a step on the path to success.
Right. Exactly. It's kind of a win-win for Minnesota. If they make the playoffs, that means all things went well. But if they do bad this year, it's not the end of the world. And they're not in that situation where they're trying to compete for a championship this year anyway. So it's definitely a weird rebuilding year, which is not something that I've seen in a while, or a lot of people have seen in a while with this team. But when it comes to the layout of this team, and you kind of mentioned the point guard position, Tiffany Mitchell is somebody that I believe will be playing point guard. I know when she first signed, I had said I think that's a realistic thing. Even in training camp, or after the first preseason game, Tiffany Mitchell said that Cheryl came up to her and was like, "We're throwing you in at point guard, see how you handle it, and see how you, no pun intended, handle it. See how everything goes with that." But what do you think about her playing, specifically Tiffany Mitchell playing that point guard position?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of, the investment in her in the free agency. And you look at that wing position, with the addition of Diamond, is just stacked. So, I think to get the kind of minutes that you'd want for an experienced player like Mitchell, it almost might require her to play point guard. But it's an interesting option, because of the fact that you just don't have that established premier starting point guard in this group. I think that's a way to, steal some minutes for your wing rotation at the expense of your point guard spot, basically.
Mm-hmm. I do think that this year too, with the Lynx, they're going to be they're not going to have, they obviously don't have that traditional point guard, but they have like maybe 5-6 players that could initiate the offense. You have Tiffany Mitchell, Rachel Banham could even initiate it a little bit. She's not the best ball handler, but she could do it. Lindsay Allen, if she makes the roster, she could, initiate this offense. Cheryl Reeve has talked about her veteran leadership on the team. You have Kayla McBride, Ariel Powers. They could, initiate the offense. Diamond Miller, even Nafisa Collier. So it's like 3/4 of this roster could initiate the offense, and they could be maybe not the primary ball handler, but they could be that ball handler too for this offense. But I think Tiffany Mitchell is not a lot of people view her as that kind of player, but I think that she will be this year, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, he really kind of continues to hammer home the similarity between Minnesota and Seattle in a lot of respects. Another team that, again, doesn't have that clear number one point guard, but you've got Kia Nurse can handle it a little bit, Jewel Lloyd, and one of the things that Sammy Wick coming off the bench likely. One of the things that Noel Quinn has talked about in their offense this year is a lot more two guard fronts to make it less of this is the point guard, this is the shooting guard, kind of more of a very old school philosophy of we'll make those players interchangeable. And I think that's something that makes a lot of sense for Minnesota too.
Mm-hmm. I know that Cheryl Reeve has even talked about in part of this is why Minnesota hasn't found that point guard that she envisions as running this offense is it's a little bit of a shift of the traditional point guard, like maybe even like the Lindsay Whalen, where she was maybe more of a floor general and kind of distributed first before taking things over offensively. Now it seems like this style of, or this kind of day of the NBA or kind of the present time, you need somebody that can step up and score and kind of be that balanced point guard rather than the traditional point guard like we've seen in the past. So I think that is maybe Minnesota trying to maybe, find kind of a placeholder right now for somebody to be that kind of player, but they're still searching for that kind of player, maybe even like a Caitlin Clark. But yeah, that it's definitely changing too, which is, I think, impacted the way that Minnesota has attacked that position.
Yeah, I mean, when Whalen came into the league, that was something I wrote about her rookie year because Taurasi, I think, was playing point guard that year as a rookie as well. Subert had been the first like real scoring threat at point guard in the W, whereas you were used to the much more set it up Jen Azzi, Teresa Weatherspoon style point guards had been kind of the dominant figures in the league for a long period of time. And now we've evolved to the point where, even someone as balanced as Whalen looks kind of like more pass first than a lot of the point guards we see now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see the kind of the shift of positions and kind of the evolving of different positions in basketball in general. I mean, like you said, the point guard position, even you could go back to the center position. A lot of we see, I look at Tim Duncan is kind of that traditional center, but now you look at players like maybe, and I'm just gonna say this because I'm a Minnesota fan, but like Karl Anthony Towns, like. That you got that stretch big. The positions are continuously changing now. In the WNBA, we're seeing it. In the NBA, we've seen it too, where you want those players that can play multiple positions. Where in years past that wasn't necessarily the case. You're the point guard and you're staying the point guard. If you're you're the center, you're staying the center. You're not going to drop down in the rotation or kind of be interchangeable in different positions. But now you could have Nafisa Collier playing any five positions on the Lynx. I mean, it's crazy how the versatility of players and just kind of the multiple positions of players and the involvement of that.
At media day, the Storm's first round pick, Jordan Horston, someone mentioned to her in a question that Noel Quinn had said she could play anywhere 1 to 4 on the court. And Horston's reply, kiddingly, of course, was, "Oh, doesn't think I can play the 5."
That's funny. I like her this year. I think that she's going to get obviously plenty of opportunities, but I do like her this year. I thought she was going to go higher than what she did. I thought she was a steal for Seattle when they ended up taking her, but I do like her. I think she's going to have a solid year this year.
Yeah, I think we all expected that, but Dallas has been known to throw a curveball into the draft. So.
Yes, absolutely. There's always that at least one pick in it almost seems like more so in the WNBA because maybe there's less, I don't know.
The intel, it's not as
right.
not as strong as.
But there's always that one player that, it's just like, who? And that's not a knock on them, but like if they really picked them there, but hey, I hope it works out, and I hope it was a solid pick, but. It was an interesting draft because there was a lot of pieces that kind of went where not a lot of people were expecting. But over the last, I think, I don't know, last few weeks or whatever with my podcasts, I've had guests on and at the end I've kind of asked some rapid fire questions or kind of, I don't know, just random things that I throw your way. So I might just wrap up the podcast doing that, just asking you a few questions. But what the first one was, what do you or who when it comes to the title favorites, who's your favorite this year?
Yeah, I have New York a little bit ahead of Vegas. Back during free agency, we were asked about this, and my answer was, if Slew goes to New York, then I would pick the Liberty. Otherwise, I would pick the Aces. And I don't think I've seen anything since then to change my mind. I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see how they fit all this talent together in New York, but that's a real good problem for Sandy Brondello to have.
Mm-hmm. How about MVP? Who do you think? Do you think Brianna gets it this year, or she's my early front runner, Brianna Stewart, to win it? But what do you think, or who do you think is going to win it this year, MVP?
I feel like there's a real opportunity for someone on one of these teams from either the second or third tier to win it because of the fact that, like, there is the concept of, can you really be the most valuable if you're on a team that's this deep and this dominant? The injuries were a factor in this, but it's the why Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, neither of them were MVP when the Warriors were far and away the league's best team. So, I don't think I've made a pick yet, but I'm toying with Elena Delle Donne.
I like that. That's a good pick. I know Lindsay Darkangelo from The Athletic and just Women's Sports last week. I had her on the pod, and she said Brittany Griner. She thinks Brittany Griner is going to have a nice year this year, and she could be an MVP candidate. But Elena Delle Donne, I like that. And to me, the thing I like most about that is the fact that would mean she's healthy, and we all want a healthy Elena Delle Donne, and I think that. Yeah, that'd be best case scenario. That'd be awesome. We need a fully healthy for a full year Elena Delle Donne. That'd be great. And the fact that Brittany Griner is back, that's going to be awesome too. When it comes to rookie of the year, who do you think? Do you think Minnesota's rookie and Diamond Miller? Do you think she could make a run at it, or who do you think would be the front runner for that award?
I mean, I think Leah Boston's just in a position where she's going to play a lot, accumulate stats. I think, she'll be hard to beat as the rookie of the year front runner. But whereas Diamond Miller has a lot more competition for playing time, I think is probably the biggest factor holding her back. But, if she manages to claw out 30 minutes a game from that group, then she's certainly got a real chance.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to, this one might be a little bit of a tougher question, but when it comes to the newcomers, there was obviously a lot of players that had shifted teams. But when it comes to a newcomer that joined a team, which one do you think might have the biggest impact, whether it was a signing or a trade?
Should we say like outside of the New York, Las Vegas?
Yeah, let's do that, because there's a lot of players to choose from when it comes to that.
Well, in keeping with my, belief in Connecticut, Tiffany Hayes, I think, is somebody who is, an upgrade on them at guard from what they've had in the past. And I think, she's not going to be the first option for them offensively because they've still got a lot of talent in the front court. But I think she's got a chance to really make a big impact this season, and maybe more than people realize, because she kind of changed teams quietly and later in the process.
Mm-hmm. Do you think when it comes to, we talked about them a little earlier, Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers, do you think that they end up coming out next year, or do you think they stay in college?
I feel like the decision is maybe different for the two of them. I mean, Paige, the fact that she's just unfortunately been able to play so little since that amazing freshman season feels like maybe that makes, coming back for a fifth year more appealing for her than it would be for Caitlin Clark. But look, Caitlin has said all along that, she loves playing at Iowa, doesn't know what her decision would be. And, I think it'll be interesting to find out. But, we have seen players forego their COVID years to come into the draft the last few years, especially to be high draft picks. But it is interesting that, players who have had the opportunity to come in early have often not done it. You look back at Sabrina going back to, I think that was 2019, when she had the chance to graduate early and be in that year's draft, which is a very interesting what if, because the Las Vegas Aces had the number one pick in that draft. And boy, how differently things might look now in that case. She decided to go back for another year because she had unfinished business. So I think part of it comes down to, what is Iowa able to do this season? Does she feel that same, urgency to come back and win a title? So I guess I didn't answer your question at all.
That's okay. You did. No, that's good. That's all right. Well, that's really all I have for you. I appreciate you joining the podcast this week. I had a great conversation with you and talking a little WNBA. And like I said, thank you for all your coverage of both the NBA and the WNBA. As a basketball junkie myself, I've really enjoyed it, and it's great coverage as always, on not only written content but on social media and kind of everywhere else. So I appreciate it, and thank you for all your coverage.
Yeah, looking forward to getting it started this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. We finally made it. So it seems like it always leading up to like the draft is always, or maybe even March Madness. It seems like it just goes so slow, and then soon as March Madness wraps up, the draft takes place, and then we're right into the season, and it's nonstop. But it's good. I'm glad it's back, and it should be a fun summer for sure. When it comes to where people can find you again, would you want to kind of plug that and where they can follow you and where they can find all your stuff?
Yeah, K Pelton WBB on Twitter again, and then the ESPN WNBA homepage or ESPNW.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Everybody go follow Kevin, and thank you for like I said, for all your work and for joining the podcast this week. Had a great conversation.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you to Kevin Pelton for joining the podcast again this week. Had a great conversation with him previewing the WNBA season and what we can expect this summer. Also want to give a shout out to Jeremy Rushing for producing this podcast. Another shout out goes out to our newest patrons of our Hitting the Hardwood Patreon community over the past week. We've had a few more additions, which I'm very appreciative of. Those include Shino, Kenneth, and Coco. Thank you guys for your support. And if you would like to show your support of the podcast and the Hitting the Hardwood brand, please visit patreon.com/Hitting the Hardwood. And that's where you can receive exclusive perks and much more as part of our Patreon community. Latest Patreon exclusive offering is my preseason thoughts and updated roster projection leading up to the start of the WNBA season. I also want to give a shout out to our two partners at Hitting the Hardwood, Homage and Better Edge. Homage is a clothing site that offers a variety of vintage merchandise, including a collection of WNBA and Lynx gear. A portion of each Lynx item or each item purchased, either whether that be a Lynx item or a WNBA item, will come back and support Hitting the Hardwood podcast. So I appreciate Homage for their partnership. Better Edge is a Minneapolis sports betting company and platform that allows users to bet against each other. And to do that with no fees. They do a great job offering different offerings, including the WNBA. So make sure to check out Better Edge, and you can find them at betteredge.com. If you do visit betteredge.com/links, you will receive a free $20 on us when you use the promo code LINKS. So please go check them out. And you can join Better Edge, and you can compete against myself. You can compete against others. We'll have competitions throughout the year. So please go check out Better Edge at betteredge.com. And it's BETTOR edge.com. Thank you once again for joining this week, and I will see you all next week as we start the 2023 WNBA season. We made it, fans.